So my mom didn't pick up that like nurturing personality.
Yeah.
So the way she interprets love is to help when you're in need. Because my grandfather used to help her out with stuff when she was having financial troubles. And that was my grandfather's way of showing love. That's where that comes from, where as a kid, I was okay with that.
Yes.
That's what love was for me. So then as I grow up and I realize that unconditional love is in the little things. It's in the I'm proud of yous. It's in the how are you doing? It's in the checking in. It's in the involvement in your life. I'm super excited for this conversation. This is, for me, it's so exciting when I get a chance to have matter experts on the show, and so to have a psychologist on board is so humbling, but also exciting for me. So without further ado, Dr. Bronce Rice, a psychoanalyst, psychologist, health and wellness coach, and author. Welcome aboard. Thank you so much for making time for this.
Hey, thank you for having me, Josh. Nice to be invited and the conversation.
There's so much for me that I have to ask. And obviously, I would love to have all day to pick your brain, but of course we have things to do. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to follow the path of the individual and just kind of what makes the person want to do what they do and what makes them run the way that they do. And so if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to ask a little bit about what childhood was like for you, and if you could remember anything, your first memory even.
Yeah. So probably an important piece for me in terms of how it kind of informed what I do, for a living.
Yeah.
My father was the pastor of the church that I grew up in for like 30 years. My mom's a school teacher. My dad was a biology teacher and then went back to college and got a graduate degree. And so I think just kind of helping other people in various ways was kind of, it was kind of in the culture of my family growing up, kind of front and center. So that's something that kind of helps inform people about, if they know that about me. I don't always kind of tell that to people necessarily, but if people know it, it helps inform how I go about certain aspects of my life.
And how would you describe your relationship with your parents growing up?
I think it was pretty warm, pretty loving individuals. My mom probably one of the most loving kind of individuals that I've ever kind of ran across. My dad, I think he could be a little stern at points if you did things that he didn't like, and he would let you know. And he wasn't necessarily good at kind of allowing someone to kind of talk with him about why you were doing something exactly. Right. And so there's this kind of weird dynamic between my parents where I could go to my mom, very loving. I could talk to her about whatever I needed to. And then you couldn't really do that with my father. And so it kind of set up this kind of weird dichotomy of who's safe and who's not.
Gotcha. Did that ever like evolve with your dad? Did that throughout your life? Did that change?
Yeah, it has. I've been in therapy myself a number of times. And I went back to a new therapist. And I've been going to see him probably, I don't know, 7-8 months at this point. He's got to be about 82, 83. So he's an older guy, but sharp as a tack. And he trained very differently than me. And I've got a ton of training. I mean, I just stuck my head in a book and just went, but this guy's kind of older. And so at some point, we're looking at kind of family issues and how you were raised and the influences, whatnot. And we were talking about how growing up, I wasn't allowed really to kind of be angry around my father. My mother I was, right? But I wasn't allowed with my father. And so I think there's a hesitancy on my end, if I'm angry, to then go talk to somebody. Because especially if I don't know them, so it sets up this kind of a struggle. And so, in the therapy, my therapist kind of helped me understand that it might be helpful to go talk to my father about the dynamic kind of in the household where he was allowed to be angry and frustrated, but nobody really else was.
Right.
Right. And so I think for me, kind of, growing up, the difficulty was how to kind of express your frustration and anger, disappointment, kind of in kind of healthy, appropriate ways.
How did and so like with your relationship with your dad as that went on, I'm sure at some point you had a conversation with him, right?
Well, and that's kind of, in my therapy currently, my therapist literally within the last few months, has kind of suggested that, hey, maybe I want to go have a conversation, with my father about that very dynamic. For me, I'm like, do you know my father?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
But, I went and had that conversation with him recently. Right. And he's not young. I'm not young. Exactly. You know what I mean? And, I don't, it went pretty well. I mean, he was able to listen to me and hear me out. And we were able to have a conversation and a dialogue about it, which was pretty interesting, in that kind of shows where he's kind of mellowed, he's matured himself in a way that I kind of know that, and yet I don't know it. And so when I went to talk to him and that we had kind of, more of an open dialogue of kind of two equals expressing thoughts and opinions back and forth. And it's like, that didn't happen.
Right.
And growing up in that regard.
Right. Right.
I mean, and so it's weird, like he's a very loving man and, kind of very religious. And so if you kind of follow the tenets, so to speak, of religion and whatnot, it's like, you're good. Right. But if you didn't in certain ways, he would get frustrated, and I think, and, kind of his own, what you'd think kind of generational conflict within a family or trauma. His own parents weren't good at kind of talking about emotions. Right. And so it probably, a godsend that I decided to go into the profession, that I've been in, for a long time now, 25 years, where I help people kind of learn what I'm trying to learn, so to speak. It's like, I got to learn it along the way, or else I can still help people, but it's another thing, like when you go through something and you understand it better, and then you can kind of help others kind of walk them through it a little bit too.
Right,
and so I could help certain, kind of males who have issues with anger or kind of help them put it into context in terms of, well, what are they frustrated about? And then how would they kind of, talk to somebody in a way that allows the anger to be talked about, but kind of in a more loving fashion. And so that, I think that took me quite a while to kind of understand how to do that. And, if it hadn't been for me being in therapy, I don't think I would have that conversation with my father. Like my therapist was like, hey, you may want to go do this.
Right.
And my therapist, interesting enough, he kind of said, hey, he never did it with his own father. Right. So it's kind of an interesting thing in the therapy. It's kind of like he's helping me do something that he never did. It's very interesting.
They have also a perspective, because when you're in it, like I'll tell you about, like we had a conversation before this, right? You and I, and I mentioned about me reaching out to my dad. One of the things that I didn't have in my life, and I also didn't have good relationships with male role models, so like father figures. When I was a kid. So that dynamic of reaching out to my father, and that was something that my therapist also suggested. That was something that for me, I didn't, I thought maybe, probably at some point, maybe it wouldn't be a bad idea, but the initiative to it's here, the plan, the planning out process was something that my therapist threw at me. And so from their perspective, they're seeing this from like a further back perspective. For me, I'm more in it. And so I'm just in the middle of it. So it's hard for somebody who's in the middle to be able to get like the perspective of what's happening further back. What's happening around me, because there are other things happening around me that is out of my peripheral vision. I'm focused on right here. And so sometimes that stuff it's in the background for me, but they can see it because they're from a different vantage point. They're not in the middle of it. Right. So I do think that that's what's helpful. And it's interesting you say that your therapist called that out for you, and because they just have I think, in my opinion, correct me if I'm wrong, they just have a further back vantage point. They're not in the middle of it.
Yeah. And they can have some, they don't have to, like, they might feel for you in various ways, but
sure.
when you're in the therapy and talking about things, you can get kind of caught up, I get, in the thought and the emotions.
Right.
And, sometimes it is hard to get perspective on kind of where we're at, and think about a broader view of, what are our choices? How do we think through this? And that is nice. That is one of the nice things about therapy is in that kind of dialogue, with my therapist. It was like he was able to kind of help me get a little more of that perspective that I think, as you're kind of hitting upon, it can be pretty hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
Right. I mean, it is a skill.
Right.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so as we move forward, last question about your dad. Did you ever figure out what his love language was? Like how he demonstrates love?
How he demonstrates love. No, I think in some ways he's like an act of service. Would be what he kind of does. And the interesting thing, the older that he's gotten, he has gotten better at verbalizing, care and concern, saying to me, right, he loves me. Right. So I know that about me. But earlier on, I think when he was a younger man, because I'm talking about my father in my mind at a younger age,
sure,
than I am now.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
But he still has that kind of older than me and whatnot. That kind of has a certain kind of image of authority figure and whatnot.
You also go back in age when you think of him, right? Like,
yeah.
Right.
Being so oriented around the church,
yeah,
it was kind of helping other people, but it was oriented to kind of helping do things for them in various ways. Like my father, it's like he would give you the shirt off his back, and he doesn't have another shirt.
Right.
Right. So it was always kind of geared towards doing things, but that perspective that you were talking about a minute ago, I think it took him, understanding him better and kind of how I grew up and some of the things that were handed down. It took him a while to get perspective on other ways of looking at life and other ways of doing it. And I think for him, there was always kind of a way to do it. It was kind of his.
Right.
Right.
And your mother, you said that she was very warm and you knew she loved you.
Yeah.
How did your relationship I'm assuming your relationship is still pretty good with her, right? Throughout your life?
Yeah, it is pretty good. But it's interesting that it has kind of shifted in some ways, where I think growing up for most of my life, I was much closer to my mother and spent, more time with her. I think she was around a little more, and made a point to be around more. But the older I've gotten, I mean, I still reach out and talk to her and whatnot, but there seemed to be a shift where I'm a little closer to my father at this point. Just in that, when I get some kind of like conflict or something going on in my life, I'm stressed out or whatnot. It used to be kind of my first inclination was to go to my mom.
Right.
Now, and I haven't thought a ton about it until you just said it, but that's kind of interesting about, like a little therapy-esque kind of thing. Like you don't pick things up until you're in the moment, right? And I will kind of be more inclined to want to pick the phone up and kind of talk to him, right? And the interesting thing is, I hadn't really. I mean, it's probably one of the things now that I mentioned, and I'll probably pick up in my therapy and kind of try to, look at why that might be and what gets stirred up for me. Because if you had kind of mentioned that would be part of the process growing up, I'd have been like, nah, that wouldn't compute.
100% what you're hitting something that's very similar in my life. For me, I think it's what it was for me was that I had this idea that like you form, at least for me as a kid, I formed this idea of who I thought my mom to be. And so as I grow up, my perspective has changed. As I've gone through healing, my perspective changed. It doesn't mean that I think that anything has changed. I don't think either of my parents are bad people. I don't think that they intended to hurt anybody, regardless of all the stuff that happened, because a lot of things did happen in my childhood that caused long-term damage for me. But as I've grown up, I've kind of I've just seen the way that I receive love has also changed, if that makes any sense. I used to be okay with very surface. The only way I understood love was the way that my mom showed it to me, which was in giving money. Like that was the way my grandfather took care of my mom, because my mom was close with her grandfather or with her dad, and my grandmother was not very good to her. She was very neglectful, and so she had a lot of issues with her mom. So my mom didn't pick up that like nurturing personality. So the way she interprets love is to help when you're in need, when you because my grandfather used to help her out with stuff when she was having financial troubles. He'd be like, here, take this. And that was my grandfather's way of showing love. He wasn't an I love you person. He didn't say those things. So my mom also didn't say those things. So for me, that's where that comes from, where as a kid I was okay with that, because that's what love was.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yes.
That's what love was for me. So then as I grow up and I'm realizing that love is a lot more than that, that the unconditional love is in the little things. It's in the I'm proud of yous. It's in the how are you doing? It's in the checking in. It's in the involvement in your life. And my mom wasn't very involved in my life. I didn't see her very often. So the little love that I did get from her was from when I needed something like money. I would like this thing. I would like that thing. And she would gather some money and be like, here, and give it to you. That's her way of showing love. And as I've become an adult, my dad does things that hit more on the things that I'm looking for, which is, are you checking on me? Are you calling me? Are you saying I love you? Are you saying like those things, the things that I didn't get as a kid, now as an adult, I'm realizing this is stuff that is love to me still. Like I want this.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and that's an interesting piece, right? In terms of kind of, what gets handed down to us in regard to love. And so you make a great point that in some ways, if your grandfather hands your mother an aspect of love for him to her,
right,
and then she's more likely to hand down something similar, right? And then for you, consciously or otherwise, you have some understanding at some level about love is in some way kind of tied to or mixed in with giving of something, right? Tangible, to help.
It's transactional. It became transactional. Yeah.
Right. And then so we then have more of a propensity to act that out in regard to people that we're trying to form relationships with, or in terms of, if we've got a partner in some kind of way, then that dynamic often shows up again in some kind of fashion. And a lot of times we're not even conscious of it. Right. And so the interesting thing is, it's almost like the love languages, right? Where and we all come from different environments, families. And so it's always interesting when you get two people together who are kind of trying to find a way of kind of connecting and bonding in some kind of intimate way to kind of, it's one thing, that mode you mentioned, to be in something, right? But it's another kind of watch, what's going on from a broader perspective, but because how do those two people bring elements of love into the process of trying to connect, right? And so if you got two people who aren't really clear and don't talk about how are we doing this, a lot of times there's a misalignment and misconnections, and so it's I think this is very fascinating stuff, obviously, in terms of what we're hitting on.
Yeah, it definitely rang a bell for me when you talked about that, of how that's changed. How do you think that that's changed? I know you were kind of getting to it, but how did that shift happen for you?
What shift again?
When you were talking about how when you were a kid, it was more with inclined, you were closer in that way with your mom.
Yeah. Well, I think you said something that I think kind of resonated, and I'm not sure if you were highlighting this specifically, but you may have. It's almost like I knew who I was to some degree, or it was a safer space to kind of be in and kind of play with my mom. Where with my dad, I don't feel like it was wasn't as safe at points. I mean, it wasn't. I mean, he could be very loving, and so it was very, and yet I think because of his own kind of upbringing, he had a more difficult upbringing probably than my mom did.
Mm-hmm.
And so that kind of got brought into the relationship of when he got stirred up and was anxious or irritable. I don't think he learned how to contend with those things within himself.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I think that's been a part of his journey to kind of figure out how to do that as an adult. But what it makes me think of is, oh, well, there probably was aspects in relation to love that probably gets broadened by having a relationship with both of them.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I probably knew about myself and how to go about things with my mom in a certain way.
Right.
Where I think with my father, that really wasn't clear. I knew he loved me.
Sure.
You know what I mean? I've got a brother who's 6.5 years younger, and so he physically, just like the touch, tactile, kind of, he has kind of always been closer growing up to both my parents,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I didn't even pick that up till a couple of years ago, where I'm just watching him like, oh, like I wonder why I don't do that. But I
Right.
think what you had said previously kind of made me think, well, I'm probably trying to understand and round out aspects of who I am and what I want. Um, like say in relation to my father,
Mm-hmm.
because I don't think I really had these kind of conversations that he's capable of now with him growing up.
Right.
I don't think he knew how to have them exactly. I certainly didn't. And so now I think there's been more of a conscious decision on mine to kind of want to know him more kind of in an intimate kind of way, kind of
Yeah.
the care
Yeah.
and love,
100%.
because I didn't really, I got it and I didn't get it. With my mom, it was like, it wasn't a question. It was just there. I got the whole package, so to
Yes.
speak.
Yes. The
You know
question
what I
for
mean?
me was
Yeah.
like before it was the curiosity. Now is what's drawing
Yeah.
me to it. Is that I'm curious about my dad now. Where before as a
Yes.
kid I wasn't. I was
That's a good
intimidated by
point.
the
Yeah.
idea of
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that's a great point. That's a great point. And I think that is very important throughout life in terms of that aspect of curiosity. Just in terms of kind of, um, in a younger day, I worked at a couple of different like psychiatric hospitals with children.
Hmm.
You know what I mean? And so it helped me understand the importance of curiosity in terms of listening to what people, have a little bit of interest in. And what do they do with that interest? Do they move forward with it? Do they know how to explore it? Or is it just some kind of fantasy in terms of, I'm going to get this, I'm going to get the big house, I'm going to get the money, I'm going to get the big job, but they haven't really explored the ins and outs of how to kind of move forward with exploring those kind of things and how to do it, and do it with kind of interest,
Right.
compassion. So any rate, yeah.
So what interested you in specifically the psychology field? At what point did you say this is what I want to do?
Yeah. Yeah, it probably came maybe late my junior year. Um, I didn't really know exactly, what I wanted to do. And so I think my parents kind of understood. I didn't know what I wanted to do either. I
Right.
think kind of I was a kid who, like for me growing up, there were two kind of principles, right, that you kind of taught to live by: education and acts of service,
Right.
right? Like those two things were just kind of built into me from day one. And I was never, until I figured out what I wanted to do as far as what I do now for a living. I didn't really have much interest in doing a whole lot of anything. Like I would dabble with a lot of things, but kind of I would poke around, join a sports club for a year, and then kind of go through the season, and I didn't have interest about it anymore. And I didn't really keep at much of anything, and so I realized with my parents, like they provided me with a lot of things, growing up, as far as um, the house, the clothes, the you know, but also, we didn't have a ton of money. they're school, basically they're like two school teachers when I was young. My dad went back to school and got a master's degree, to help with money. But there was something in my mind where just like, they're good parents. And so I
Right.
don't really want to do anything wrong, so to speak. And so I want to walk the straight and narrow.
Right.
And so if I got, for me, school wise, if I got B's, there really wasn't, that was okay. I mean, they wanted me, they wanted, they wanted more than that in various ways. But I think that as long as I got that, that was okay. And so I think I learned how to get B's and then go do whatever I wanted.
Right. Right.
I was more interested in socializing with my friends. Right. And they eventually kind of figured, hey, well, why don't you go to medical school then? Right. And so I took medical classes and whatnot, did pretty well. But again, it was that kind of thing in terms of, well, I did okay to get enough to get B's.
Right.
And eventually just like, well, but eventually you have to sit down at some point and think, is this something I'd want to do for a living? And it really wasn't. And so it was at some point where I figured out it's like, so for a career, right? It's something that we're doing right now. It's like, okay, so you and I can sit down, we can talk about life. I can listen, hear where you're at in life. You can tell me some important things about yourself, and we can have some important conversations about life. And I can kind of offer my thoughts. You're going to listen to them, and I'm like, and you're going to pay me for that, right? I'm like, younger days, like I'd have done this for free. Are you
Right.
kidding me? It's I think because of kind of growing up, kind of in a religious, spiritual kind of environment in various ways, I kind of lived to kind of hang out with my friends and just interact. And so eventually, I was a priest for a number of years as well, right? But before I decided to kind of do what I'm doing now, right? And eventually it was just kind of like, do I want to kind of follow, my father's footsteps
Right.
because eventually, he for a number of years, he kind of just did being a pastor and whatnot, kind of almost like full time. At some point. So I kind of thought, well, hey, do I want to do that? And I think I dabbled in some ways. And so somewhere along the way, it's almost like I didn't know exactly. And so I kind of did what my parents wanted, wanted to be a good kid,
Sure.
if you will. But then eventually, I think it was just kind of like, as I mentioned, in terms of, hey, if I could do this, I loved it. Again, I could have done it for free.
Yeah.
And so somewhere along the way, I'm like, well, understanding that about myself in terms of kind of hanging out, talking about important things. It's like, oh, being a therapist is probably the closest thing you're going to get to it, other than, probably being a priest.
Sure.
You know what I mean? And I've made
but why not a priest?
Well, I think, my thinking about that kind of has been, I kind of boiled it down probably in my mind back when, a little bit too simplistically, but I thought, well, there's kind of two routes. It's like, will you have your relationship, with God, and then you have your relationship with kind of other individuals, and how you treat them, kind of kindness, love, forgiveness, those kind of things that are kind of preached about,
Right.
Discussed in the Bible and whatnot. And so, again, I was always drawn to the latter. It was, I wasn't always sure, kind of, is there an afterlife? Like, I don't know.
Right.
But I understood that when there was someone suffering, and you could talk to that person, you could be kind, you could be humble, that there was something in that true that resonated with me. And so in some ways, it was just something I kind of grew up with from day one. And so somewhere in my mind, I mean, I might have been able to eventually kind of do both, what I mean? But eventually I kind of looked at it in terms of, well, eventually it's like, well, part of the growth and maturation is kind of trying to figure out where you've come from, and then figuring out how to take that and kind of move out into the world and do a few things that, maybe you'd like to do.
Right.
that, and so I think for me, it was just like, hey, this was something that's close to my heart.
Right.
We're kind of the aspect of the church and religion in terms of kind of, is, say, from how I grew up, is Jesus the Son of God? I'm like, I don't know. And then I'm like, if I don't know, does that, when I wrestled, does that mean that I'm not a Christian? And just, there was all that stuff, I think when I was younger
Yeah.
that I grappled with. And so to me, that there was just the certainty in terms of that I could kind of help somebody talk about life and learn about how to do that, kind of with the theory and principles and whatnot, that just kind of resonated with me. And I think that's eventually what made the choice for me. Right.
You mentioned something really interesting that resonates with me as well, which was that I wrestled very much so with religion as well growing up. I was raised Catholic, and I had my first communion. I did, I did the whole thing. And so for a while we were going to church and pretty regularly. And there was a point in time where I asked my mom, "Hey, why'd you stop going?" At some point she stopped going. It was right around the time my grandfather died. And he's like, well, he used to want me to go. So, I would go. And then at some point I'd be like, well, why are you a Catholic? Why do you practice? And she was like, well, I don't know. That's just what I was told to do. And so that's where my questioning began. It's like, well, if you don't know, then how am I supposed to know? Well, And so that's that's where it came from for me. But I would consider myself spiritual, where I believe that in some way, shape, or form we're all connected, and whether there's an afterlife or not, I do believe that we're all at least connected in some way, and I think that therapy is a part of that connection, and it's like a bridge. It's a bridge to others, and so I see it very much where I think both things can be present. At least it is for me. Where spirituality exists, where I believe that if nothing else, we're connected, and because we're connected, if I hurt you, I hurt me, and that is very much how I carry my life. How has it affected you? Would you say that any of your practices influence how you do therapy?
Say that again.
Would you say
clarify that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. For example, like any practices, any teachings you had growing up in the church, where you go, I want to take this part, and I want to, I think this will serve me well to treat people or to talk to people.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing where, so there is a piece where the kind of the love, the compassion, the connecting with something inside us that can resonate, with other people at points. Again, I think kind of when we're suffering or in pain, and to have that connection with somebody else where some of that can be kind of understood, but almost through the connection and the discussion, something can be understood about the suffering at points, and then sometimes a better understanding about what to do about some of that. But some of the lifting at times can come in the relationship, right? And so it's an interesting thing, for me, is like, just again from a young age, that kind of human connection, the intimacy of it, the humanity. I was raised to think, and it has a feel of some kind of an emotional resonance that's almost kind of life-giving in some kind of way. Or like if you think about love, it's like, well, there are elements of love, I think, that go on in therapy, that to help somebody understand themselves with care and compassion. And it's different, I'm not a parent, right? I don't have children, but there's an element of kind of connecting, with people in a way that I think parents can connect if they, have their stuff together, right? And they're very loving and kind. It helps with our maturation and growth growing up to have those models and interactions. And so there is something that, that I think about, kind of mind, body, spirit. Because I think about it, kind of therapy and what I do, about well-being kind of holistically. I do think about it now, mind, body, spirit, but yeah, that's probably a newer way for me to think about it. Yeah, probably in the last 5 to 7 years, maybe. I was trained kind of psychoanalytically, like I'm a psychoanalyst, and so you get the kind of the New York caricature of somebody kind of laying down on the couch, right, and the therapist is behind the couch. It's like I was trained to do that.
Right.
I mean, there's a lot of jargon, and it's steeped in theory. Um, but eventually, after my training, I'd listen to people and like, oh, there are other things that I didn't really get trained about. Sleep, exercise, diet, that I kind of, almost what certain people would call kind of like um, lifestyle medicine, so to speak.
Right.
And so there's ways I want to kind of look at kind of the person as a whole and look at the various different parts and how to have some integration. And so for me, I've kind of evolved, along the way. But in some ways, you could look at it almost like uh, a regression, but
Right.
not in a bad way. It's like I'm picking up something from my past
Sure.
and bringing it into kind of what I do for a living. And some people would kind of say, well, it's already in there. You're just figuring out how to bring it out and participate in it. So for me, it's kind of an interesting question that you ask. It's like, I think I'm kind of in the midst of evolving
Right.
with answering, that question. But if you had talked to me probably 7, 8 years ago, probably behind closed doors, I could probably say, yeah, there probably is something spiritual about the connection and what I do at points.
Yeah.
Now I can understand more the complexity of it and how to talk about it in a more
Right.
rich way.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's not black and white. That's for sure.
Right.
And that's where that's why the curiosity is really important, because your understanding of it today might not be anything like what it is tomorrow. Same thing with me. I might see it very differently tomorrow. So I'm curious. I keep my curiosity open enough to wonder if there's more to things. And so that's kept me on my toes. And I think that way of looking at it has kept me from falling into rather like a, not regression, but a standstill, stagnating.
Stagnation. Yeah, stagnation. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so that's the thing that's keeping me from being stagnant, is just be curious. And so I do have a couple of questions though regarding your practice, because I've had the opportunity to ask a couple of therapists this question, and I do seem to be getting get very different answers, and of course it's different on for the individuals. In your practice, what do you do? Are there things that hit you personally that you have to almost like go through a process of not bringing it home? Does that happen to you?
Yeah. I'll give you an example of what you may be touching upon.
Yeah.
So, in growing up, kind of in my family, and this kind of religion was key. It was the biggest thing. Like, I remember going with my mom, like part of the church would collect tithes and offering, a collection of money, right? And most people don't know what that money goes to, right? And so I figured out part of that money where my mom figured out. I grew up just right outside Flint, Michigan,
Right.
And so there were points where I'd go with my mom to give free lunches to kid in the inner city who didn't have enough money, right, to kind of have lunch. And so my mom she knew where to go to package up the food and to buy it, so that it was kind of like given that then. So I would go with her every once in a while into the school, and everyone knew my mom and knew what she was doing. So it was very interesting just to kind of watch. It's like, oh, so my mom is going to take something that was offered up and go give it to inner city kids in Flint. So it was like she lived out some principles. She walked the walk, talked the talk, kind of a thing. So there's something about always wanting, needing to help.
Right.
But eventually, if you do what I'm doing long enough, it's like, well, you kind of got to have some boundaries. or you burn out,
Right.
right? Um, and so I think kind of the leaving it at home or at work. I'm not sure exactly.
Right.
I might have you come back to the question. I'm not sure if I got it right,
No, no,
but
you're absolutely right. That's right.
you know, but I think in a younger day when I was just trying to figure things out, I didn't know as much. It was like that's like all I did in a lot of days was just kind of come home from work after a long day, trying to help people and keep reading, and I eventually like during the pandemic, it was just, that was an interesting time because I would have people that I used to see in my office, 5, 6, 7 years ago want to come back to see me, and I didn't have any spots open. Right. And
Right.
so in my family, right. I mean, it was a sin to turn somebody away.
Oh, okay.
You know what I mean? And so it just the conflict of not turning, and it wasn't like I was turning away someone I didn't know. It was like I knew these people.
Right.
I cared about these people. They cared about me. And it was, therapy and whatnot, but it still had an aspect of care involved in it. And so, again, when someone's suffering, it's like you go, you go serve.
Right.
And so that's been a journey for me, just in terms of boundaries and when to shut things off, and then how to go take care of myself and my self-care, so that it doesn't become, too overwhelming, stressed out, burned out. But I didn't understand those things, when I was younger.
Right.
And in some ways, that could be like another type of repetition, because in my family, it's like, man, you did it all the time.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So that would be kind of an example of where kind of like I've had to learn at points, when I'm done, hey, be done. Go for a walk. Go for a hike.
Right.
You know what I mean? Take a
How do you
nap.
how do you feel you handle it today?
You know, um, so one of the practices I do, so in the morning, I'll get up and write. I'm trying to get a book published, and so I have to put a lot of stuff out, like on Substack and whatnot.
Right.
I got to build out like an author platform and different
Sure.
things, and so I try to spend some time thinking and writing a little bit, but then I get up and do some exercise, for myself, and then it wasn't until the pandemic that I used to take like an hour lunch, and so I would probably um, finish up with a session, grab something to eat, take a nap, get up, have some espresso, go back to
Right.
work. Well, now I've learned to take an extra hour. So Monday through Friday, I take 2-hour lunch breaks, which to me, it's like, for some ways it was kind of like, yeah, but you're losing all this money,
Right. Right. I could see that.
right?
Absolutely.
And yet I had to kind of think, well, okay, but then so what I do is, as I took that hour, I just extended to 2 hours, and so what I would do is, I get something to eat, take a nap, I then go for a hike down the street from where I live every day, Monday through Friday.
Right.
Come back, take a quick shower, then I have my espresso, and go back to work. But I've had again, that's part of the boundaries in terms of, hey, you don't have to take everybody. It's okay. You're not a bad boy. It's got in my
Right.
mind. I'm that little kid, right? You're not a
Right.
bad boy. You didn't do anything wrong, But in my mind, it was like, yeah, you got to take people. You got to see people. You got to help.
Right.
Right. And so it was kind of a weird kind of thing that then eventually I understood that. But the principle, right? If I heard, it's like, well, I got to take care of myself before I can be any good to anybody else. And so,
Absolutely.
so
Yeah.
and so, I had been doing my job for a long time by the time the pandemic hit. And so that was an interesting time for most people. But yeah, I think it was time that it was at a point where I had to reflect in a hard way in terms of, well, what else? And at that point in time, I started writing the book, started taking longer lunch breaks. There's things that I would take up, that I wanted to kind of the curiosity, just to kind of asking myself, well, what are you curious about? What else do you want? What else do you kind of need to take care of yourself to be healthier?
Right.
Right. And so I make sure I take breaks from what I do to go out and exercise and help my body and my mind. Yeah.
Is part of the training that you do to be a therapist, is the advice to have your own therapist there, or is that something you had to learn?
Um, that's kind of an interesting one because, like when I trained as a psychoanalyst,
Right.
right? It was kind of required that you have your own analyst. And it's an interesting process, because I ended up going to my analyst for about 6.5 years.
Right.
And I went 5 days a week. It wasn't just once a week. I mean, it was 5 days a week for 6.5 years. And so it was a very kind of intense process. It's one of those things where at points I remember kind of like, man, I know more about myself than I want to know.
Mm.
You know what I mean? So I was steeped in it. Where now, the guy that I go to, I see him, once a week, and he's trained very differently than me. And so it's been very interesting to talk with him. It's like, if you go look at a therapist, and I probably have more training because I got my master's. Then I went on and got my doctorate. I did 3 different postdocs, for 5 years. I did like a 2-year research training at the Yale Child Study Center. And then right after I did a 10-year program to become a psychoanalyst.
Mm.
And so that's like, I don't know, that's like somewhere between, 25, just the amount of time and years that I put into it was just, so it was like, and so in some kind of weird way, it was almost like I didn't know at the time, but almost like a repetition of what went on in my family again. It's like, I just did it and kept doing it and kept doing it and kept doing it.
Right.
And so that piece about learning to have boundaries and take breaks, and you know what I mean? So I'm not sure if I answered your question though.
No. Yeah, no, I was just asking if it was. You did say that you had to have your own part of training.
It was part of my training. It's kind of required, in terms of to know what it's like to be in that process,
right?
In relation to somebody else, trying to kind of talk about life and work it out, with somebody else who does the same thing. And so, yeah, what was required, and so to me, I've probably, I don't know, I've probably seen 4 or 5 different types of therapists, throughout my life. And I'm just kind of one of those people who kind of thinks, not that I have to go to therapy the rest of my life, so to speak, but I do think therapy in a certain kind of way is an ongoing, lifelong process.
I was just about to ask you that question.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, I was just about to ask because I'm learning just from me going to therapy that it seems as though it's kind of like it becomes like physical training. Like you go to the gym to maintain, not necessarily always to build. Like yes, like you can build and if you go regularly enough and with enough intensity, you will make gains as well. But you can also use it just to maintain because your body over time is gonna start to decay if you don't keep those muscles working and if you don't keep them in check. And I'm learning that if I can just stay as a maintenance because life takes different. It's a roller coaster. It's waves, and at times it gets rough. And so in those downhill moments, to have that maintenance in there is just prevents the down from being too low. That's how it was for me.
Well, and I think that's a great observation. I mean, if you kind of think a little bit about what you mentioned in terms of kind of childhood and upbringing, it's like so if there's difficulties there in various ways, and again, we all have difficulties. I don't care who you are in terms of your upbringing. It's like you look at the most person who kind of calls themselves normal or what. I'm like, well, what does that mean? You know what I mean? But part of the therapy early on for me, was to kind of look at the suffering, as I mentioned, to help try to alleviate the best I could and understand it, put it into context, right? But I don't know, like probably halfway in terms of eventually when I was finished my training, doing it on my own, I came to a realization. It's like, well, but there's a flip side to that coin. If I'm learning how to deal with my struggles and what kind of brings me suffering and whatnot, how to adapt, right, in healthy ways, how do you do that? But then the other side of the coin was, well, but how do you kind of, yes, maintain that, but how do you spend time with the curiosity about what's healthy and what's good for you, and how do you use that as a way of looking at that process in life within yourself to connect up, kind of like, things that produce health and wellness, higher quality of living, call it whatever you want, but it's good, right? And it's part of what helps us kind of maintain aspects of just feeling good. And so there became a point of like, well, I want to spend time knowing what that's like.
Right.
Right. I mean, there's, and so, now I kind of think about it in terms of, well, it's the full spectrum of the coin. It's like, well, the good, bad, and the complicated, just like there are things that, because, if you look at kind of positive psychology or self-help, genre, a lot of times they're just kind of focusing on what is positive and how to go about it in life.
Right.
Okay, it can be very helpful, but if you've ever tried to do that when you haven't looked at your difficulties,
Right.
that is sooner or later you hit some roadblocks, and that kind of 10 ways to healthy living, it's not going to work eventually.
I think that is very every individual is unique in that there's going to be a different way. The way you respond to things is so different person to person. For example, my brothers and I we responded to the exact same trauma very differently. My personality is more outspoken, where my other siblings are quiet. Like their response to that trauma was, don't make noise, don't bring attention to yourself.
Right.
And my response was, somebody needs to do something. This isn't okay. So there's that back and forth, right? And you could say similar scenarios, but entirely different reactions because we're different people. And so like the idea that anything is one solution, one size fits all. It's so complicated. It's so complicated. It's too complicated to be one size fits all. And so I get what you're saying with that. And I mean, the difficult part too is that I think the challenge for therapists is that they have to also figure out what is the path. Well, not figure out, help you figure out what is the path.
No question.
Exactly.
No question. So if you were to go over to my Substack page, right, and I got one article pinned that's on the front of it. It's called like it's the well-being equation is like a fingerprint,
right?
And it's exactly kind of what you're talking about. It's like I kind of tried to figure out, well, what are the various different elements and factors that kind of go into your well-being, and how would I help somebody kind of think about that, create it, bring it into existence, be curious about it. But that's what you hit upon. It's like, well, the self-help genre, wants me to kind of like manualize that thing. Right. And I'm like, but that's not how life, or that's not how therapy works. Because you hit upon, like, every person who comes to see me, it's like, it's different. And what goes into their well-being is all a little different. It's like, we all got to, sleep, exercise, diet. It's like, that's going to be helpful to everybody. But how you figure it out, how you play it out,
how you get there, how it is
very different for each person. Yeah. Exactly. And I think that's part of the journey.
Yeah.
Of trying to figure out how to do that in life as a responsible, hopefully loving, caring adult.
Right. So as we're getting close here to our hour, I do want to wrap up with some final questions for you. One of the things you mentioned earlier was about your book, and I would just like if you could take a moment if you'd like to talk about the book. I'd love for the audience to know what to look out for.
It's called The Wellbeing Equation.
Okay, and this is out right now?
No, it's not. I'm kind of in the process of building out my kind of online author platform.
Got it.
I'm in the process of, it's a whole. I'm trying to go for kind of like a traditional or hybrid route. If I was going to self-publish it, my book probably would have been out, I don't know, 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, maybe.
So Substack might be a good place for us to see any updates on that.
I think Substack is probably I do some stuff on LinkedIn, Medium, and Substack, but Substack's it probably houses more of my stuff. You're gonna get more of a flavor in its totality there.
Right.
And so probably the article you'd want to just start with is that well-being, your well-being equation is like a fingerprint. And it hits upon that idea. It's like, we all have fingerprints, but they're all different. Sure. And so the equation that we're all trying to live out and figure out, if we can, it's all different. I mean, there may be similarities. I get it. But again, I think with the self-help kind of genre, in terms of it tries to manualize it and say, hey, do these 10 things and you'll miraculously heal. And I'm like, it's like, all right, I've read a slew of self-help books. I mean, there's a point where I was kind of a self-help junkie.
Right.
And it's like, I always find something helpful. But most of them come from this kind of manualized approach in terms of this is how you do it. And I'm like,
Sure.
that doesn't work.
Right.
I mean, eventually it doesn't work.
Sure.
Right. I mean, it might work for certain people. So not,
Right.
but
But
not
it's not
for
a one.
everybody.
It's not a one
No, it's
size
not.
fits all.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's kind of what I think my book is kind of about. It's kind of the journey of helping people talk about not only the factors, but how do you kind of look at those factors and how do you build them out? Like, there's a section there somewhere about mental equations of living,
Right.
right? And I lay it out like a math problem, right? My mom's a math teacher, and so I have a tendency to think in math. I hate math when I was a kid, right? But somehow it seeped in, you know what I mean?
Sure.
And so I'm sitting with my patients, listening to the various things they're talking about, and in my mind, I'm laying it out like it's a math equation in terms of, okay, so they're stressed out and they're depressed. Well, what, in my mind, I'm listening to them. Well, these are the factors that go into them kind of being depressed. And then I try to flip it on its head. It's like, well, what are the things we'd have to kind of input so that they wouldn't be depressed?
Mm.
And I'm like, oh, so we all kind of have mental equations of living, whether we know it or not. We're all trying to get some of the good life
Sure.
and try to understand what are those things that go into and how to weave it together so that we feel pretty good on certain days. So that's, it's a little bit about what the book is about.
Okay.
And a little bit about my ongoing journey as well.
Well, I would definitely recommend anybody watching to go check out Substack and LinkedIn and anywhere else that you're on, just so that we can kind of follow. I mean, I know I'll be following you throughout that journey. I'd like to see how that turns out.
Yeah, and I know at points that there are times that your podcast go a little bit longer. I didn't have a ton of time today.
No, that's okay.
I'd be happy to come in again down the road, because I know there's probably questions that we didn't get to or would spur more.
Absolutely, and I really appreciate it. I was going to extend the offer as well. That I would love the invitation. I would love to have you back on if you ever have more time on your schedule. As the road goes on, I know that sometimes that your schedule gets filled and you don't have control of it. So if you ever do get down the road, please let me know. Absolutely. And I'll have you back on. Two last questions for you.
And I got some time, so a little bit.
Yes. If you have you discovered purpose, and if not, what do you think it is? And if you have, what is it?
I think I've probably, in some ways, probably answered that.
Yes.
In that, my purpose is to sit with people, to have meaningful conversations, to go back and forth and kind of have some curiosity, have some kind of love and kindness, and look at what's getting in the way of a certain kind of living that people want, or kind of, and then try to, it goes back to kind of growing up. It's like, there's an element where I'm trying to alleviate suffering. And so it's kind of an interesting, like, my purpose in some ways is to help myself and other people take where they've come from and try to kind of live it out in some kind of ways that may be similar in certain regards, but other ways is you try to live it out differently, because we're all kind of unique, trying to figure out, well, this is what we were raised with, the good, bad, and the difficult, but we're trying to live it out in terms of, to find passion, to find meaning, to find connection, to find friendship, love. Mm-hmm. And so my purpose in some ways is just to kind of help people try to explore those things in their life and to figure out what's helping and what's getting in the way. Right.
If you could speak to your childhood self, what would you say?
I still, it's interesting. I did put a post out at some point on not a post, but a note on Substack, mm-hmm. where I went through kind of exploring what would I tell my younger self, and I met myself. I have a soft spot for espresso, right? And so I met that kid in a coffee shop. Mm. So I'm thinking, because I love coffee shops, right? So I didn't get to the coffee shops till late in my life. My family doesn't drink. None of them drink coffee. I'm the only one, right? And there's something about kind of like, hey, slow down, right? Take a pause. It's all right. You don't have to keep moving. Right, you could almost hear it in terms of all the education. I just kept going. I was very interested in it. I loved it. And so I was curious. It's like the one thing in my life that I joke, with some of my buddies. I'm like, yeah, I'm really good at what I do for a living, but it's probably the only thing I'm good at, because I just spent so much time at it, you know what I mean? So I think I kind of tell that kid, hey, it's going to be all right. You're still going to have stress. You're still going to have hard days. You're still not going to know what the hell you're doing, but it's okay, because there are days you are going to know what you're doing and you're helping people and it means something, but slow down. Just enjoy, like what we're doing right now. Just like, hey, take a breath, breathe in, hold it, breathe out. Just, it's all right. It's important. Don't miss it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rice, for all your time. We'll be in contact soon. And again, we'll let you know anything that comes up. We'll keep you posted.
Thank you. I've had a great time. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much.
Right.
We'll see you soon. Thank you.